A mafia boss declares to a homeless girl, "You need a home, and I need a lover." On the night she thought she'd freeze alone, the most dangerous man in the city drags her into his world. He offers her safety, but at a terrifying price. At first, she resists, desperate to escape his grip. But when rival gangs come for her, she realizes the truth. Being claimed by a mafia boss makes her the most protected and the most hunted woman alive. Every glance he gives her burns with obsession. Every hand that touches her meets his rage. And just when she starts to see the broken man behind the monster, betrayal strikes from inside his empire, and she's the one everyone wants to use as a weapon. Is she trapped in a cage of love, or standing at the center of a war she can't survive? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The winter wind howled through the cracks of the abandoned warehouse, making Sophia pull her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting eerie shadows across the concrete floor where she huddled in a corner. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when she'd managed to buy a small coffee with her last dollar. Just until morning, she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the cold air. "I'll find something tomorrow." The words felt hollow, just like all the other promises she'd made to herself since ending up on the streets. Her fingers traced the edge of her worn sketchbook, the only possession she'd kept from her old life. Even paper and pencils were luxuries she could no longer afford. The sudden crunch of gravel outside made her freeze. Voices, male and low, approached the warehouse entrance. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows. The heavy metal door groaned open, and 3 figures stepped inside. "Check the inventory," a commanding voice ordered. "Make sure nothing's been touched since last week's shipment." Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Sophia held her breath, watching the men move through the warehouse with practiced efficiency. They were dressed in expensive suits, definitely not typical security guards. The leader stood apart, his presence demanding attention even in silence. He moved like a predator, each step calculated and graceful. A beam of light swept across her hiding spot. "Boss, over here!" Sophia scrambled to her feet as 3 flashlights converged on her. Fight or flight instinct kicked in, and her hand found a broken pipe on the ground. She gripped it with trembling fingers, backing away until she hit the wall. The leader stepped forward, and even in the dim light, she could see his face clearly now. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through her, and an expression that suggested he was used to absolute obedience. She'd seen enough movies to recognize a mafia don when she saw one. "What do we have here?" His voice was smooth as silk but carried an underlying edge of danger. "A little mouse in my warehouse." One of his men reached for what was clearly a weapon, but the boss held up his hand. "Wait." Sophia's grip tightened on the pipe. "Stay back," she warned, hating how her voice shook. "I don't want trouble, but I'll defend myself if I have to." Instead of anger, something like amusement flickered across the man's face. "You're threatening Lorenzo Moretti with a rusty pipe." He took another step closer. "Do you know what happens to people who threaten me?" She swallowed hard, but didn't lower her makeshift weapon. "I don't care who you are. I'm not dying without a fight." Lorenzo's dark eyes studied her with growing interest. Where others might have seen a homeless girl in dirty clothes, his gaze seemed to strip away the layers, analyzing her like a puzzle he wanted to solve. "Most people beg for their lives when they're caught trespassing in my territory. I don't beg," Sophia shot back, even as fear clawed at her throat. "If you're going to kill me, just get it over with." He moved so fast she barely saw it coming. The pipe was knocked from her hand, clattering across the floor, and suddenly he was right in front of her. His fingers caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His touch wasn't rough, but it brooked no resistance. "Such fire," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. "When was the last time you ate, little mouse?" The question caught her off guard. "What does it matter to you?" "Answer me." Something in his tone made her comply. "Yesterday morning." Lorenzo's other hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, and Sophia struggled not to lean into the warmth of his touch. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger, a combination that made her head spin. You need a home, he said, his voice dropping lower, intimate. His eyes never left hers as his thumb continued its gentle exploration of her face, a stark contrast to the power she could feel coiled in his body. I need a lover. He paused, letting the words sink in. Stay. Be mine. Sophia stared at him in shock, her body trembling not just from cold now, but from the implications of his offer. His men stood silently in the background, as if this was a normal occurrence, their boss offering propositions to homeless girls in warehouses. His hand still held her chin, waiting for her response, while her mind raced with confusion and fear, and something else she didn't want to name. The warehouse seemed to shrink around them, the air growing thick with tension as Lorenzo Moretti, clearly a dangerous man, clearly someone who could end her life with a snap of his fingers, waited for her answer with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Sunlight filtered through heavy velvet curtains, casting unfamiliar shadows across Sophia's face. Her eyes fluttered open, then widened in panic as she took in her surroundings. Gone was the cold warehouse floor. Instead, she lay in a king-sized bed, draped in silk sheets, that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. The events of last night crashed over her like a wave. The warehouse, the Mafia Don, his proposition. Her fingers clutched the sheets, knuckles turning white as she realized what had happened. She'd passed out, whether from exhaustion, fear, or both, she couldn't remember. A knock at the door made her jump. A man in a dark suit entered, his holstered gun visible under his jacket. Mr. Moretti requests your presence for breakfast, he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Sophia's anger flared. Tell Mr. Moretti he can go to hell. She threw back the covers, realizing she was still in her clothes from yesterday, though someone had removed her shoes. The guard's expression didn't change. There are fresh clothes in the closet. You have 15 minutes. I'm not his dress-up doll. But the guard had already stepped outside, closing the door with a decisive click. Sophia ran to it immediately, testing the handle. Locked, of course. Her prison, though gilded, was impressive. The room was bigger than her old apartment, with a private bathroom that gleamed with marble and gold fixtures. In the closet, she found designer clothes in exactly her size, the kind she used to dream about wearing back when she had dreams to spare. After using the bathroom, because her body's needs wouldn't wait for her pride, she refused to change. Let him see her in her worn jeans and faded sweater. She wouldn't play his game. Exactly 15 minutes later, the guard returned. He led her through hallways that spoke of old money and power, original artwork on the walls, antique furniture that probably belonged in museums. They descended a grand staircase to a sun-filled dining room, where Lorenzo Moretti sat reading a newspaper as casual as if kidnapping homeless girls was his normal morning routine. He looked even more dangerous in daylight. His tailored suit emphasized broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. When he looked up, those dark eyes pinned her in place. Good morning, little dove. He folded the newspaper precisely, setting it aside. Please, sit. You must be hungry. I'm not your dove. Sophia spat, remaining standing. And I want to leave. Lorenzo's smile didn't reach his eyes. We discussed this last night. I made you an offer. That wasn't an offer. It was a threat. Sit. This time, his voice carried steel. The guard's hand pressed on her shoulder, forcing her into a chair. A maid appeared, setting down plates of eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and pastries that made Sophia's mouth water despite herself. Her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Lorenzo watched her, amusement dancing in his eyes. When was the last time you ate a proper meal? He reached across, lifting her chin with one finger. I can count your ribs through that sweater. The streets haven't been kind to you, have they? Sophia jerked away from his touch. My circumstances are none of your business. Everything about you is my business now. He pushed a plate closer to her. Eat. You'll need your strength. The food was torture to resist, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I'm not hungry. No? Lorenzo picked up a strawberry, examining it. The winter's getting colder. Food banks are overcrowded. Shelters are full. He bit into the fruit, juice staining his lips red. How long before desperation drives you to something worse than sleeping in my warehouse? Tears of fury and frustration burned behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Instead, she grabbed a pastry and bit into it defiantly, hating how divine it tasted, hating him for being right about her hunger. She spent the day exploring her prison, looking for weaknesses. The windows were sealed and reinforced. Guards patrolled the basement and grounds. But by evening, she discovered the service stairwell, used by maids bringing up fresh linens. It wasn't as heavily watched. Sophia waited until night fell. She counted the guard rotations, timing them perfectly. When the hallway cleared, she slipped into the stairwell, heart pounding as she descended. The kitchen was empty. Shift change, just as she'd hoped. A door stood ajar, leading to the back alley. Freedom beckoned. She ran. The cold hit her like a slap, but she didn't slow down. Her feet pounded against the pavement as she turned onto the main street. Just a few more blocks and she'd lose herself in the city. Strong hands grabbed her arms. Two men materialized from the shadows, dragging her struggling form back toward the house. She kicked, screamed, fought with everything she had, but it was useless. They hauled her past the kitchen entrance to where Lorenzo stood watching, his face carved from stone. Only his eyes betrayed emotion, cold amusement that sent chills down her spine. "You'll learn, little dove," he said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "There is no running from me." The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Lorenzo's penthouse in shades of gold. Sophia's stomach twisted as one of his men, Marco. She thought she'd heard someone call him, guided her firmly toward an elaborate dining room. The table before her looked like something from a magazine, laden with fresh pastries, fruit, and steaming coffee in delicate china cups. "Sit." Lorenzo's voice cut through the room. He stood at the head of the table, his dark suit impeccable, watching her with those predatory eyes that hadn't left her thoughts since the warehouse. Sophia's legs trembled as she sank into the chair he indicated. The silverware gleamed, mocking her with its perfection. How many nights had she dreamed of a meal like this while huddled in doorways or behind dumpsters? Now that it was in front of her, she felt sick. "Eat." He pushed a plate of croissants toward her. "You're too thin." Her fingers curled into fists beneath the table. "I'm not hungry." Lorenzo's laugh was soft and cruel. "Your pride won't fill your stomach, little dove." He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming the space between them. "How long has it been since you've had a proper meal? Days? Weeks?" The truth was, she couldn't remember. The gnawing in her belly had become such a constant companion, she barely noticed it anymore. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of admitting it. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I thought I made that clear last night." He lifted his coffee cup, studying her over its rim. "This city, half of it belongs to me. Every warehouse, every dock, every shadow where desperate little girls try to hide, including you." The casual way he claimed ownership made her blood run cold. "I don't belong to anyone." "No?" His smile was dangerous. "Then leave. Walk out that door. See how far you get before my men bring you back." He gestured to Marco, who stood silently by the door. "Or before someone worse finds you. The streets aren't kind to pretty girls alone." Sophia's hands shook as she reached for a croissant, if only to have something to focus on besides his penetrating stare. The pastry melted in her mouth, and her traitor stomach growled for more. "Good girl," Lorenzo murmured, satisfaction coating his words. "You see, life can be pleasant here. You'll have food, shelter, protection." His voice hardened. "In return, you'll be mine. Fight me if you want, many do at first. But understand this. You will always lose." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "And if I refuse?" "Refuse?" He spread his hands, encompassing the wealth surrounding them. "Look around you, Sophia. There is no refusing. You're here because I want you here. You live because I allow it. People disappear in this city every day, some by accident, some by design. Which will you be?" The threat hung in the air between them, wrapped in silk and served with coffee. Sophia's throat tightened as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. This man, this monster, in an expensive suit, could erase her as easily as breathing. "Why me?" she managed to ask. There are plenty of willing women who'd kill for this. Lorenzo reached across the table, catching her chin in his hand. His touch was gentle, but his grip was iron. Because you looked at me with fire in your eyes instead of fear. Because you grabbed that rusty pipe and prepared to fight rather than beg. And because, his thumb traced her lower lip, I want to watch that fire burn for me instead of against me. She jerked away from his touch, but he only smiled. Finish your breakfast, little dove. Marco will show you to your room afterward. I have business to attend to, but I'll return this evening. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. And Sophia, don't try to leave. You won't like the consequences. Later, alone in a bedroom larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, Sophia finally let the tears fall. The bed was soft, the bathroom stocked with expensive products, the closet filled with clothes in her size. A beautiful prison, but a prison nonetheless. I can't stay here, she whispered to herself, but the words rang hollow. Where else could she go? The streets had nearly killed her. Her stepfather's house was worse than any cage Lorenzo could build. And now she knew, truly knew, that this dangerous man had the power to find her anywhere. She curled into herself on the massive bed, her sobs muffled by silk pillows that probably cost more than she'd ever earned in her life. The morning sun continued to shine, indifferent to her pain, casting golden bars across the floor like the bars of a cage. The marble hallways echoed with Sophia's footsteps as she paced in her gilded prison. The sun had set hours ago, casting long shadows through the floor to ceiling, windows. She'd spent the day exploring the boundaries of her new cage, testing which doors were locked, which corridors led to dead ends. A crash of breaking glass shattered the evening silence. Sophia froze, her heart jumping into her throat. The sound had come from down the hall from Lorenzo's study. Against her better judgment, she moved toward the noise. The heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. Through the gap, she saw Lorenzo hunched over his desk, one hand pressed against his side. Dark red seeped between his fingers, staining his crisp white shirt. "Get out!" he growled without looking up. His voice was strained, lacking its usual authority. Sophia should have run, should have retreated to her room and left him to his pain. Instead, she pushed the door open wider. "You're bleeding." Lorenzo's head snapped up, his dark eyes finding hers. Broken glass littered the floor around his feet, a tumbler of whiskey sacrificed to his anger or pain. "I said, get out." She took a step forward, then another. "Let me help." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Help? You'd sooner let me bleed out." "Maybe." Sophia moved closer, careful to avoid the glass. "But I won't." His jaw clenched as she approached, but he didn't stop her when she reached for his bloodied hand. Gently, she pulled it away from the wound. A knife slash cut through his shirt, the fabric torn and wet with blood. "First aid kit?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Lorenzo nodded toward a cabinet behind his desk. "Top shelf." Sophia retrieved the kit, setting it on his desk. "Take off your shirt." His eyebrow raised slightly, a ghost of his usual arrogance crossing his features. Demanding. "Would you prefer I leave you to bleed?" Without a word, he began unbuttoning his shirt. Each movement was careful, controlled, but Sophia caught the slight tremor in his hands. When he shrugged the fabric off his shoulders, she sucked in a breath. Scars decorated his torso, old knife wounds, bullet marks, stories written in damaged flesh. The fresh cut ran along his ribs, angry and red, but not too deep. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to his chair. To her surprise, he complied. Sophia wet a cloth with antiseptic and began cleaning the wound. Lorenzo watched her work, his eyes never leaving her face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, muscles tense with each touch. "My men wouldn't dare," he said softly. Sophia paused, meeting his gaze. "Wouldn't dare what?" "Touch me when I'm vulnerable." His voice was low, almost contemplative. "They fear what I might do, but you—" He reached up, catching a loose strand of her hair between his fingers. "You show no fear at all." She pulled away from his touch, focusing on applying butterfly bandages to the cut. "I'm not brave. I just don't have anything left to lose." Don't you? His hand found her chin, tilting her face up. You have your life, your freedom, such as it is. Yet, here you are, helping the man who took both. Sophia's hands trembled as she pressed the last bandage in place. Maybe I'm just tired of seeing people hurt. Lorenzo's thumb brushed across her lower lip, the touch feather, light. Such a tender heart. How did you survive the streets with such softness? She stepped back, gathering the bloodied cloths and empty bandage wrappers. I should go. As she turned to leave, his hand caught her wrist. Not roughly. Not with the bruising force she'd come to expect from him. His grip was gentle, almost pleading. You'll see soon enough, Sophia, he said, his voice carrying an emotion she couldn't name. I may be a monster to them, but to you, I can be something else. His touch lingered on her skin, warm and dangerous in its tenderness. Sophia stood frozen, caught between the urge to run and the strange pull she felt toward this complicated man. In the soft light of his study, with his guard lowered and his wounds bare, he seemed almost human. The moment, stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. His thumb traced small circles on her pulse point, each touch sending shivers up her arm. The scent of blood and antiseptic mixed with his expensive cologne, creating a dizzying combination that made her head swim. Lorenzo's eyes held hers, dark and intense, filled with something that looked almost like vulnerability. It was more frightening than his anger, more dangerous than his threats. This glimpse of the man beneath the monster threatened to crack the walls she'd built around her heart. Blood had soaked into the expensive carpet beneath his feet. The broken glass sparkled in the lamplight, and still he held her wrist, as if it was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. The juxtaposition of violence and tenderness made her dizzy, confused her senses until she no longer knew if she was his prisoner or his savior. Sophia stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The black cocktail dress hugged curves she didn't know she had after months of near starvation. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat Lorenzo's gifts that felt more like chains. Her dark hair fell in soft waves, styled by the team of beauticians he'd sent to prepare her. Beautiful, Lorenzo's voice came from behind her. She watched in the mirror as he approached, his tailored black suit emphasizing his broad shoulders and commanding presence. But missing one thing. He reached around her, fastening a delicate gold bracelet around her wrist. The clasp clicked with finality. His fingers lingered on her skin, sending unwanted shivers down her spine. I don't want this, Sophia said, meeting his dark eyes in the mirror. Any of it. Lorenzo's lips curved into that dangerous smile she'd come to know. What you want doesn't matter, little dove. You're mine now. And tonight, everyone needs to know it. The ride to the club was tense. Lorenzo's Ferrari purred through the city streets while Sophia pressed herself against the passenger door, trying to maintain distance in the confined space. His hand rested possessively on her thigh, thumb stroking small circles that made her pulse race with a confusion of fear and something else she refused to name. Club Inferno lived up to its name. Red lights bathed the exterior, and bass thundered through the walls. Lorenzo's men flanked the entrance, nodding respectfully as he guided Sophia inside with a firm hand on her lower back. The music hit her like a physical force. Bodies writhed on the dance floor, while crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the scene. Everything screamed wealth and power, from the private booths lined in rich leather to the top-shelf liquor gleaming behind the bar. Heads turned as Lorenzo led her through the crowd. Men's gazes lingered too long on her body, appreciation turning to calculation when they recognized whose arm she was on. Women shot her looks of envy and hatred. Sophia felt exposed, marked. Lorenzo steered her toward a raised VIP section where several well-dressed men sat watching the crowd below. Their conversation died as Lorenzo approached. One man older, with silver threading his dark hair, smiled like a shark scenting blood. Lorenzo, he said, standing to shake hands. What a pleasure. And who is this lovely creature? Before Sophia could speak, Lorenzo's arms snaked around her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. His voice carried clearly despite the pounding music. She's mine, untouchable. The words fell like stones into still water. Sophia felt the ripples spread through the watching crowd. The older man's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned calculating. Other men at nearby tables exchanged knowing looks. "Of course," the older man said smoothly. "Welcome to the family, my dear." Lorenzo settled them into a booth, keeping Sophia pressed close to his side. Drinks appeared without being ordered whiskey for him, champagne for her. She sipped, slowly, watching the complex dance of power plays unfold around her. Men approached to pay respects to Lorenzo, their eyes sliding to her with new interest. Each time, his grip on her waist tightened possessively. "Dance with me," he commanded after an hour, pulling her to her feet before she could protest. The crowd parted as he led her to the dance floor. His hand splayed across her back, the other clasping hers as he moved them to the music. "They're all watching," Sophia whispered, tension thrumming through her body. "Let them watch," Lorenzo murmured in her ear. "Let them see exactly what they can never touch." His lips brushed her temple, and Sophia shivered. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares, some envious, some calculating, all dangerous. In declaring her his, Lorenzo had painted a target on her back. She was no longer just a homeless girl he'd collected. She was leverage, a weakness, a way to hurt the untouchable Don. When they finally left, the night air felt like a slap after the heated club. Lorenzo's driver held the car door, and Sophia slid into the back seat, her hands trembling slightly. Lorenzo joined her, immediately pulling her closer. "You're shaking," he observed, running his fingers along her bare arm. "Those men," Sophia said, "the way they looked at me after you claimed me. They can look all they want." His voice turned to steel. "But you belong to me now, and I'll kill anyone who tries to take you." The quiet certainty in his voice chilled her more than any shouted threat. She believed him completely. Lorenzo Moretti would paint the streets red to keep what he considered his. She had seen the monster beneath his elegant exterior, and now she was irrevocably bound to him. The city lights blurred past the window as they drove home, and Sophia wondered if she would ever feel truly safe again. The diamonds at her throat felt heavier with each passing moment, transforming from mere jewelry into the visible bonds of her captivity. She belonged to him now, and the whole underworld knew it. The night air kissed Sophia's skin as she stepped onto the penthouse balcony, 40 floors above the glittering city. After 5 days in Lorenzo's gilded cage, these stolen moments alone were all she had left. The concrete beneath her bare feet felt cold, but it was better than suffocating inside those luxurious rooms where his presence lingered on everything. She gripped the metal railing, letting the wind whip her hair around her face. The city stretched endlessly below, a maze of lights and shadows. So close to freedom, yet so far Lorenzo's men watched every exit, every corner of the building. But up here, she could at least pretend. The scrape of shoe against metal made her freeze. Before she could scream, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The stranger's breath was hot against her ear, reeking of cigarettes and whiskey. "Don't move, pretty thing," he growled, his grip bruising her arm. "You're coming with me. Moretti needs to learn he can't have everything he wants." Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled, but the man was too strong. His other hand wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. The edge of a knife pressed against her ribs, cold even through the thin silk of her nightgown. The balcony door exploded open. Lorenzo stood there, his usual composed mask shattered by pure rage. His eyes, usually calculating and cold, blazed with murderous intent. He moved like a predator, each step measured despite the fury radiating from him. "Let her go." Each word dripped with lethal promise. The stranger laughed, but Sophia felt his hand trembling. "Or what, Moretti? You're getting soft keeping pets. The other families are talking." Lorenzo didn't let him finish. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, his hand shooting out to grab the man's wrist holding the knife. The crack of breaking bones split the night air. The stranger screamed, the knife clattering to the ground. Sophia stumbled away as Lorenzo threw her attacker against the railing. His fist connected with the man's face once, twice, 3 times each impact accompanied by the wet sound of breaking flesh. Blood sprayed across the concrete. "Watch!" Lorenzo commanded Sophia, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the violence of his actions. "Watch what happens to anyone who tries to take what's mine." She couldn't look away, horror and fascination warring in her chest as Lorenzo grabbed the man's throat. The stranger gurgled, clawing at Lorenzo's grip. Blood from his shattered nose painted his face crimson. "Please," the man choked out. "I was just following orders?" Lorenzo's smile was all teeth. "Tell me who sent you, and I'll make it quick." When the man only wheezed in response, Lorenzo shrugged. "Have it your way." In one fluid motion, he lifted the stranger and threw him over the railing. The scream lasted only seconds before it was cut off far below. Sophia's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, trembling uncontrollably. Lorenzo turned to her, his white shirt splattered with red, his hands dripping. Instead of the monster she should see, all she could focus on was how his chest heaved with exertion, how his eyes still burned with protective fury. He knelt before her, cupping her face with those blood-stained hands. The metallic scent of blood mixed with his cologne, a combination that should revolt her but instead made heat pool in her belly. "This is who I am, Sophia," he whispered, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "I kill without mercy. I destroy anyone who threatens what's mine." His touch was impossibly gentle despite the violence she'd just witnessed. "Do you still fear me?" She should say yes. Should scream, should run, should be disgusted by the man who had just murdered someone in front of her. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her body betraying her mind's protests. I don't know," she whispered honestly. Something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, perhaps, or triumph. He helped her to her feet, his hands leaving red prints on her white nightgown. Without a word, he led her back inside, past the guards who had appeared at the commotion, past the luxury that surrounded them. In her room, Sophia collapsed onto the bed, her whole body shaking. She could still smell him on her skin where he'd touched her blood and cologne and male heat. The memory of his hands on her face made her shiver, but not from fear. She pressed her face into the pillow, trying to escape the conflicting emotions churning inside her. The horror of witnessing murder warred with the undeniable heat that had flooded her when he'd touched her so tenderly afterward. How could the same hands that had just ended a life make her skin tingle with want? Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Not with the echo of breaking bones in her ears and the phantom sensation of Lorenzo's bloody fingers tracing her lips. She was falling into something dangerous, wanting a man who killed without hesitation, who claimed her as property, who had just proved exactly how far he would go to keep her. The worst part wasn't the violence she'd witnessed. It was the realization that some dark part of her had thrilled at his possessive protection, at the raw power he wielded in her name. She curled into herself, haunted by the heat that still pulsed through her veins at the memory of his touch. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across marble floors, still stained with last night's violence. Sophia's hands trembled as she poured coffee, desperate for something normal after witnessing a man's death. The kitchen felt too large, too empty until it wasn't. Lorenzo's presence filled the doorway like a storm cloud. Dark suit immaculate, no trace of blood remained on his hands, but Sophia couldn't forget how they'd looked covered in red. She gripped her coffee mug tighter, refusing to meet his gaze. "You're avoiding me." His voice carried that dangerous silk she'd come to know. Not a question, a statement of fact. "I watched you kill someone last night." The words scraped her throat. "What did you expect?" He moved closer, each step deliberate. "I expected you to understand that I'll do anything to keep what's mine safe. I'm not yours." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She tried to slip past him, but his arms shot out, caging her against the counter. "Aren't you?" His breath fanned her cheek. "Your heart says different, little dove. I felt it racing when I touched you." Heat flooded her face. That was fear. No, Lorenzo's fingers traced her jaw, leaving fire in their wake. "Fear makes you run. But last night, you leaned into my touch." "Stop." But her voice wavered, betraying her. "Make me." The challenge in his words sparked something dangerous between them. Sophia shoved against his chest. Lorenzo caught her wrists in one hand, pulling her closer until their bodies aligned. The coffee mug shattered on the floor, forgotten. I hate you, she whispered, but her eyes dropped to his mouth. Lie to yourself if you must. His free hand tangled in her hair. But your body can't lie to me. The kiss exploded between them like a powder keg. Nothing gentle, nothing sweet, just raw need and pent-up tension finally breaking. Sophia gasped against his mouth, and Lorenzo seized the opportunity to deepen the kiss, claiming her completely. Her hands fisted in his jacket, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. He tasted like danger and desire, everything she shouldn't want but couldn't resist. Lorenzo growled low in his throat, lifting her onto the counter. Marble cold against her thighs, his body burning hot between them. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her neck, but his hands were already sliding under her shirt, mapping her skin like territory he meant to conquer. I can't. The admission broke something inside her. God help me, I can't. Clothes became obstacles, discarded piece by piece. Lorenzo's usual control fractured, replaced by something primal and possessive. He marked her neck, her collarbone, everywhere his mouth could reach. Sophia gave as good as she got, nails scoring his back, teeth catching his lower lip. When he finally took her, there on the kitchen counter, it was with the same intensity that defined everything about him. No gentleness, no restraint, just pure, consuming passion that left them both gasping. Afterward, as their breathing slowed, reality crept back in. Sophia expected him to leave, to remind her this changed nothing. Instead, Lorenzo gathered her close, his face buried in her hair. My brother used to say I was too soft. His voice came rough, unexpected, that I'd never survive this life if I didn't learn to be cruel. Sophia stayed perfectly still, afraid any movement might shatter this rare moment of openness. He was right. Lorenzo's arms tightened. The night he tried to kill me, I hesitated, nearly died for it. In the end, I had to choose, be the monster or be the corpse. You killed him. Not a question. She'd heard whispers among his men. Yes. The word held years of pain. My own blood. The one person I thought would never betray me. That's what this life does, Sophia. It turns everything to ash. She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. Then why stay in it? Because it's all I know. His eyes met hers, dark with memories. Until you. You make me want impossible things. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to face. Lorenzo kissed her again, softer this time, before pulling away. He dressed with mechanical precision, armor sliding back into place. Your guards will be outside. He paused at the door. Don't try running again. Not after this. Sophia nodded, knowing it wasn't really a request. She gathered her own clothes, wincing at fresh bruises that matched his fingerprints. That night, lying in her bed, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lorenzo's hands dealing death one moment, bringing pleasure the next. The same mouth that ordered kills had whispered broken confessions against her skin. She touched the marks he'd left, each one a reminder of their shared madness. Terror and desire twisted together in her chest until she couldn't separate them anymore. The monster who'd killed his own brother was the same man who'd held her like she was precious. Sophia stared at the ceiling, remembering how his mask had cracked, showing glimpses of the wounds beneath. In those moments, she'd seen past the dawn to the man, and that terrified her more than any violence. Because monsters were easy to hate, easy to resist. But this man, with his darkness and his pain and his desperate need for her, he could destroy her in ways no weapon ever could. Sophia paced the marble halls of Lorenzo's penthouse, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. 2 days had passed since their passionate encounter, since he'd revealed the darkness in his past. But something else nagged at her now, something that made her skin crawl. Marco, Lorenzo's right-hand man, had been watching her, not with the usual protective distance of Lorenzo's guards, but with calculated interest that made her stomach turn. She'd caught him following her movements, always lingering just within earshot. That morning, she heard his whispered phone conversation from around the corner. Yes, the girl is still here. Sophia. No, He keeps her close. Marco's voice dropped even lower. Tomorrow night. The meeting at the docks. Yes, I understand. Sophia's heart pounded against her ribs. The way he said her name felt wrong, like she was merchandise being inventoried. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing as Marco's footsteps faded away. Later that afternoon, she found Lorenzo in his study, surrounded by papers and a glass of whiskey. The setting sun cast his sharp features in amber light, making him look more dangerous than ever. "Something's wrong with Marco," she blurted out, wringing her hands. "I heard him on the phone talking about me." Lorenzo barely glanced up. "Marco has been with my family for 15 years. He's loyal. But enough." His tone cut like steel. "You're paranoid from being cooped up here. I have important business tomorrow night. We can discuss your concerns after that." Sophia opened her mouth to argue but caught the warning in his eyes. She retreated, frustration burning in her chest. Even after everything, the kiss, his confession about his brother, he still dismissed her like a child. The next evening came too quickly. Lorenzo adjusted his suit jacket in the mirror, while Sophia watched from the bedroom doorway, dread coiling in her stomach. "Stay inside tonight," he ordered, checking his gun before sliding it into his holster. "I mean it, Sophia. No wandering." She nodded, but the warning in her gut screamed louder. As Lorenzo left with his men, she noticed Marco lingering behind, his eyes meeting hers with an unsettling smile. Hours crawled by. Sophia tried to sketch in her notebook, but her hands shook too much. The penthouse felt like a cage, suffocating her with silence. A commotion erupted downstairs, shouting, "Gunfire!" Sophia ran to the door, but Marco was already there, grabbing her arm. "Lorenzo's in trouble," he said urgently. "We need to get you to safety." Before she could protest, something sharp pricked her neck. The world tilted sideways as darkness crept in from the edges. The last thing she saw was Marco's cold smile as he lifted her limp body. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the bite of rope against her wrists and the musty smell of abandoned space. Sophia's head throbbed as her eyes adjusted to dim fluorescent lights. She was tied to a metal chair in what looked like an old warehouse similar to the one where Lorenzo had found her, but larger, emptier. Footsteps approached from behind. A hand roughly grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. The face that loomed over her sent ice through her veins. Well, well. Her stepfather's alcohol, soured breath washed over her face. The little runaway, living it up with the infamous Lorenzo Moretti. His yellowed teeth showed in a cruel grin. "You thought you escaped me, girl?" Sophia's throat closed with terror. This man had haunted her nightmares since she fled home at 17. His drunken rages, his grabbing hands, the bruises she'd hidden under long sleeves. Now he stood before her, more monster than memory. "How?" she managed to whisper. "Your new boyfriend's got enemies," he sneered, releasing her hair. "One's willing to pay good money to hurt him. Marco's been feeding them information for months." He circled her chair like a vulture. "When they found out about my connection to you, well, let's just say family reunions can be profitable." Sophia pulled against the ropes, earning a sharp slap across the face. Stars exploded behind her eyes as her stepfather laughed. "Still fighting, I see. Good." He leaned close, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I'm going to enjoy breaking that spirit all over again. And this time, there's nowhere to run." The warehouse echoed with his footsteps as he walked away, leaving Sophia alone with the reality of her situation. Lorenzo had been right about one thing she couldn't escape. But he'd been wrong about Marco, and that mistake might cost them both everything. She tested the ropes again, wincing as they cut into her skin. Somewhere in the distance, she heard voices arguing, caught fragments about ransom and sending a message. Her stepfather's cruel laughter mixed with unfamiliar voices, all discussing her fate like she was a piece in their game. The rope felt slightly looser on her right hand. Sophia worked it carefully, ignoring the pain as she twisted her wrist. If Lorenzo survived the ambush, he would come for her. But after dismissing her warnings, would he even know where to look? The thought of facing her stepfather's cruelty again made her blood run cold. She had to find a way out before the monster from her past could reclaim his power over her. Lorenzo's world shattered the moment he entered the empty bedroom. Sophia's sheets lay twisted and cold, her scent lingering like a ghost. His fingers traced the edge of her pillow, still dented from where she'd slept. The silence screamed danger. "Find her!" his roar echoed through the penthouse. Guards scattered like frightened birds, but Lorenzo's rage had only begun to simmer. He stalked through every room, his footsteps heavy with promised violence. When his phone buzzed with surveillance footage, his blood turned to ice. Marco, his trusted lieutenant, forcing Sophia into a black SUV. "Betrayed," he whispered, the word tasting like ash. "By my own blood." Within an hour, Lorenzo unleashed hell. He stormed rival territory with 20 of his most loyal soldiers, kicking down doors and painting walls red. Each rival soldier who refused to talk met death, some quick, others lasting long enough to serve as examples. "Where is she?" he demanded, holding a gasping man by the throat. When silence answered, Lorenzo's knife answered back. He left the first warehouse burning, black smoke rising like a signal of war. The city's underworld erupted. Sirens wailed in the distance as Lorenzo's men hit 3 more locations. Each raid left bodies and burning buildings in its wake. He wasn't just sending a message, he was carving it into the flesh of anyone who dared stand in his way. "The wolf hunts tonight," whispered the streets. Those who knew him best had never seen such fury. Lorenzo wasn't just the calculated crime lord anymore. He was raw vengeance wrapped in designer suits and gunpowder. Marco tried to run. Lorenzo found him cowering in a safe house on the edge of town, surrounded by cash and fake passports. The sight of his former lieutenant's fear did nothing to soothe Lorenzo's rage. "You were family," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. "And you sold her to them." "They offered me millions," Marco babbled, backed against the wall. "The Vitali family, they wanted leverage against you. Your weakness for the girl." Lorenzo's gun cracked once, shattering Marco's kneecap. The screams that followed were music to his ears. "She's not my weakness," he growled, advancing slowly. "She's my strength, and you never understood that." What followed would become legend in the criminal underworld. Lorenzo took his time with Marco, extracting every detail about Sophia's location between screams. When he finished, he arranged Marco's body as a warning strung up outside the rival family's favorite restaurant, with a simple message carved into his chest: "No one touches what's mine." The city held its breath as Lorenzo's war machine rolled through the streets. 3 more warehouses burned. 6 safe houses reduced to rubble. The body count rose with each hour Sophia remained missing. Police scrambled to contain the violence, but Lorenzo's influence ran too deep. This was mob justice, pure and simple. Finally, after 18 hours of bloodshed, Lorenzo got the location. An abandoned meatpacking plant on the outskirts of town. He didn't wait for backup. Couldn't wait. The thought of Sophia in their hands for even 1 more minute made his trigger finger itch. He armed himself heavily, 2 handguns, a knife strapped to each leg, and enough ammunition to start a small war. His black suit was already spotted with blood, but he didn't care. Let them see death coming. "Boss," one of his men called out, "we should wait for—" "No." Lorenzo checked his weapons one final time. "They took what's mine. Now they pay." The meat-packing plant loomed ahead, its rusty walls holding his whole world hostage. Lorenzo could feel Sophia's presence inside, could almost hear her heart, beating in sync with his own. He'd burned half the city to find her. He'd kill the other half to get her back. "Stay alert," he ordered the few men with him. "But Sophia is mine to save. Anyone gets in my way, friend or foe, they die." Guards patrolled the perimeter, but they might as well have been children playing at war. Lorenzo moved like a shadow, each shot precise and deadly. Bodies dropped silently as he advanced, leaving a trail of death in his wake. The first explosion rocked the building's foundation, a distraction set by his men. As chaos erupted, Lorenzo slipped inside through a side entrance. The smell of old blood and rust filled his nose, but underneath it all, he caught a whiff of something familiar. Sophia's perfume, faint but present. His heart hammered against his ribs as he moved deeper into the facility. More guards appeared. More bodies fell. Lorenzo's guns sang a deadly symphony, each shot bringing him closer to her. He barely felt the bullet that grazed his arm, didn't even flinch when a knife sliced his shoulder. Nothing mattered except finding her. Through the halls he stalked, a predator with single-minded purpose. Each empty room fueled his fury. Each dead end made his hands shake with barely contained violence. But he wouldn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until she was safe in his arms again. The sound of voices drew him toward the building's center. As he approached the main processing floor, Lorenzo heard something that made his blood boil. Sophia's muffled cry of pain. His vision went red. "Ready or not?" he whispered, checking his ammunition one last time. "I'm coming for what's mine." Blood trickled down Sophia's split lip as she glared up at her stepfather. The warehouse air hung thick with dust and the metallic scent of her own blood. Her wrists burned against the rope binding her to the wooden chair, but she refused to show weakness. "Still got that look in your eyes," her stepfather sneered, pacing in front of her. His expensive suit couldn't hide the monster she remembered from her childhood. "Always thinking you're better than me. Where's that attitude gotten you now? Better tied to this chair than anywhere near you," Sophia spat, earning another backhand across her face. The strike made her vision blur, but she forced herself to stay conscious. "You've gotten mouthy living with that crime lord," he growled, grabbing her jaw. "Think you're special because Moretti keeps you as his pet. You're nothing, just like your mother was nothing." Sophia jerked her face away from his grip. "Don't you dare talk about her." A distant popping sound made her stepfather pause. More pops followed. Gunfire. Her heart leaped as shouts and screams erupted outside the warehouse. Her stepfather's face twisted with rage as he pulled out his gun. "Your boyfriend's here," he snarled, pressing the barrel against her temple. "But he's too late. I'm going to make him watch you die, just like I made you watch your mother." The warehouse door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Through the smoke and splinters, Lorenzo strode in like an avenging angel, his suit pristine despite the carnage he'd carved through to reach her. Blood splattered his white shirt, none of it his own. Her stepfather spun, trying to use her as a shield, but Lorenzo moved with lethal grace. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. The first knocked the gun from her stepfather's hand. The second shattered his kneecap. The man collapsed with a howl of pain. Lorenzo crossed the space in measured steps, his eyes holding a coldness that made Sophia shiver. This wasn't the man who touched her with gentle hands in the night. This was Il Lupo, the wolf that other criminals whispered about in fear. "You hurt what's mine," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he stood over her stepfather. "You touched her, made her bleed." "Wait, I can explain," her stepfather started, but Lorenzo silenced him with a boot to his throat. "I want you to know something before you die," Lorenzo continued, pressing down harder. "Every man who helped you take her, they died screaming. Marco died last, begging for mercy he didn't deserve. But you?" He leaned closer. "You get to die knowing she'll live. That she'll forget you ever existed. That everything you tried to break in her made her stronger." Lorenzo's gun pressed against her stepfather's forehead. The man's eyes widened with terror as he realized death had come for him at last. "This is for every time you made her cry." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Sophia flinched, but couldn't look away. The monster of her childhood lay still, his blood pooling on the concrete floor. The nightmare that had haunted her for years was finally over. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and turned to her. In an instant, his entire demeanor changed. The cold killer melted away, replaced by the man who whispered Italian endearments against her skin. He knelt beside her chair, hands gentle as he cut through her bonds. "You're safe now," he murmured, carefully examining her injuries. His fingers ghosted over her bruised cheek, her split lip. "I'll never let them touch you again. Never let anyone hurt you." The adrenaline that had kept Sophia strong began to fade. Her hands shook as the reality of everything crashed over her. The kidnapping, the beatings, Lorenzo's rescue. Tears spilled down her cheeks as he gathered her into his arms. "I thought," she choked out, clutching his bloody shirt. I thought you wouldn't come, that you'd decide I wasn't worth. Shh, cara mia, Lorenzo interrupted, holding her tighter. I will always come for you. I burned half the city to find you. I'd burn the rest if I had to. Sophia buried her face in his neck, breathing in his familiar scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder. His heartbeat thundered against her palm. Steady, alive, real. She'd seen his violence unleashed, witnessed the monster everyone feared, but here, with his arms around her, she felt only safety. Take me home, she whispered against his skin. Lorenzo stood, lifting her easily in his arms. She curled into his chest as he carried her past the bodies of her captors, through halls stained with the proof of his devotion. The night air hit her face as they emerged, and she saw the extent of his rampage, burning buildings, lighting up the sky, smoke turning everything hazy and red. His men parted before them, heads bowed in respect or fear. Lorenzo's car waited, sleek and black against the chaos. He settled her in the back seat, sliding in beside her rather than letting her go. Rest now, my love, he murmured, pulling her close as his driver started the engine. It's over. You're mine again, where you belong. Sophia closed her eyes, letting exhaustion take her at last. She was his, had been since that first night in the warehouse. Now she understood the full weight of what that meant. His protection, his possession, his love, expressed in blood and bullets. She belonged to a monster, but he was her monster, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The penthouse felt different now, warmer, safer. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights like scattered stars, but Sophia barely noticed the view. She sat perched on the edge of Lorenzo's massive bed, watching as he gathered medical supplies from his private bathroom. He returned with a sleek first aid kit, his movements careful as he set it down beside her. Gone was the brutal man who'd torn through her stepfather's warehouse like an avenging angel. This Lorenzo moved with deliberate gentleness, his dark eyes fixed on her injuries. Hold still, he murmured, dampening a cloth with antiseptic. His touch was feather-light as he cleaned the cut on her lip, his other hand cupping her jaw to keep her steady. The sting made her wince, but she didn't pull away. I've had worse, Sophia whispered, trying to make light of it. Lorenzo's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Never again, he growled, the words low and fierce. Your stepfather will never touch you again. I made sure of that. Sophia closed her eyes, remembering the savage efficiency with which Lorenzo had executed her stepfather. The gunshot had been precise, almost surgical, one bullet between the eyes. No hesitation, no mercy. You killed him like it was nothing, she said, opening her eyes to study Lorenzo's face. Like swatting a fly. He hurt what's mine. Lorenzo's fingers traced the bruise blooming on her cheekbone. For that alone, his death was too quick. The tenderness of his touch contrasted sharply with his words. This was the paradox of him, the man who could order deaths without blinking, yet cleaned her wounds with hands that trembled slightly. You're a monster, Sophia said, but there was no heat in the words. They both knew it was true. Lorenzo didn't deny it. He simply nodded, continuing to tend to her injuries. To them, yes. To the world outside these walls, I am exactly that. Il lupo, the wolf who shows no mercy. His eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. But never to you, Sophia. Never to you. She reached up, covering his hand where it rested against her cheek. I know, she whispered. The realization had been building for weeks, through every gentle touch, every protective gesture. That's what scares me most. I've seen both sides of you now, the monster and the man. And she swallowed hard. I love them both. Lorenzo went still, his breath catching. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, this powerful man who held life and death in his hands. Then he surged forward, capturing her lips with his. The kiss was careful, mindful of her split lip, but filled with an intensity that made her head spin. Say it again, he demanded against her mouth. I love you, Sophia breathed. God help me, I do. His growl was pure possession as he gathered her closer, mindful of her bruises. She melted into him, letting his strength envelope her. His hands skimmed over her body, checking for hidden injuries, but the touch soon turned heated. "Let me show you," he murmured, laying her back against the silk sheets. "Let me prove what you mean to me." Their coupling was different this time, slower, deeper. Lorenzo worshipped every inch of her with lips and hands, as if trying to erase the memory of her stepfather's brutality with pleasure. Sophia clung to him, allowing herself to be lost in the sensation, in the safety of his arms. Later, as the city lights painted patterns across the ceiling, Sophia curled into Lorenzo's side. His fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine, his heartbeat steady under her ear. The penthouse was quiet except for their breathing and the distant hum of traffic far below. "I was homeless for so long," she whispered into the darkness. "Not just on the streets, even before with him. I never had a real home." Lorenzo's arms tightened around her. "You'll never be homeless again," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. His lips brushed her temple, impossibly gentle. "You're my home now." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes at the words. She understood what they meant, coming from him. Lorenzo Moretti, who trusted no one, who had killed his own brother to survive, was offering her not just his protection or his bed, but his heart. She pressed closer, breathing in his familiar scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder. The combination no longer frightened her. Instead, it meant safety. It meant belonging. It meant home. His fingers continued their gentle exploration of her skin, tracing each bruise as if memorizing them. She knew tomorrow he would ensure everyone responsible for her kidnapping paid dearly. The monster would return, dealing death and retribution. But here, in this moment, he was simply hers, the man beneath the wolf's mask, holding her like she was something precious. Sleep began to pull at her, heavy and sweet. Lorenzo pulled the silk sheets higher, around them, cocooning her in warmth. His heartbeat remained steady, a rhythm she could trust to keep the nightmares at bay. "Sleep, my love," he murmured into her hair. "I'll keep watch." And Sophia did, knowing that while monsters might rule the city beyond their windows, in this bed, in these arms, she was finally, truly home. The bass thrummed through the elegant marble floors of Crimson, Lorenzo's most prestigious club. Sophia's heels clicked against the polished surface as she walked beside him, her midnight blue dress catching the light. It was hard to believe that just weeks ago, she had been huddling for warmth in an abandoned warehouse. Now, she moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her place in this dangerous world. Lorenzo's hand rested possessively on her lower back, a gesture that spoke volumes to everyone watching. The club's patrons, made men, business associates, and the city's elite bowed their heads as the couple passed. Some did so out of respect, others from fear. All of them recognized what she had become, the queen to his king, the woman who had tamed Il Lupo. "Your usual table, Don Moretti?" the manager asked, practically bending in half with his bow. Lorenzo nodded once, guiding Sophia to the elevated section that overlooked the entire club. As they settled into the plush leather booth, she watched him survey his domain. His dark eyes missed nothing, every shadowy corner, every whispered conversation. "They fear you more now," Sophia observed, taking a sip of the champagne that appeared without being ordered. "After what you did to Marco and the others?" A cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Fear keeps order." His fingers traced her jaw, gentle despite his words. "What they did to you will never happen again. I've made sure of it." She knew what he meant. In the days following her rescue, Lorenzo had systematically destroyed every threat to his power. Rival families had been crushed, traitors eliminated, and alliances reinforced through both fear and favor. The city's underworld now bowed deeper than ever to the Moretti name. A lieutenant approached their table, waiting for Lorenzo's acknowledgement before speaking. "The shipment arrived safely, boss. All accounts settled." "Good." Lorenzo dismissed him with a glance, his attention returning to Sophia. "The business runs smoother with you by my side. You see things I miss." It was true. Sophia's street-honed instincts had already helped him spot several potential betrayals before they could develop. She had transformed from his captive into his most trusted advisor, her compassion tempering his brutality when needed, her fire matching his when circumstances demanded it. "Dance with me?" she said suddenly, standing and holding out her hand. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow but allowed her to lead him to the dance floor. The crowd parted instantly, creating space for them. As they moved to the music, Sophia caught glimpses of their reflection in the club's mirrored walls. She barely recognized herself anymore. Gone was the gaunt, frightened girl in ragged clothes. In her place stood a woman draped in designer silk, diamonds at her throat, power in her stance. Lorenzo's queen. The music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Lorenzo pulled her closer, his lips brushing her ear. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your old life? Your freedom?" Sophia thought about it. About the cold nights and empty stomach. About running and hiding and never feeling safe. She thought about the warmth of their bed, the safety of his arms, the thrill of standing beside him as he built his empire. "This is my freedom," she answered honestly. Different than I imagined, but real all the same. They returned to their penthouse later that night, the city lights twinkling below their floor-to-ceiling windows. Lorenzo wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing out at their domain. His empire had grown stronger with her beside him, their love forging something unbreakable from the broken pieces of their pasts. Lorenzo turned her in his arms, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "You needed a home," he murmured, echoing the words that had started their story. "I needed a lover. Now we have both. Forever. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."